You've probably experienced this moment yourself. Maybe it was with someone you cared about deeply. You were in the middle of explaining yourself again, defending your position, trying desperately to make them understand where you were coming from, and then something shifted. You got tired, not just physically tired, but emotionally exhausted. So you stopped. You stopped arguing. You stopped trying to convince them. You stopped chasing their approval, and something unexpected happened. Maybe she smiled. Maybe she acted like nothing had changed. Maybe she even seemed lighter, happier than she'd been in weeks. And that's when most people get confused. Because on the surface, it looks like she doesn't care. It seems like your silence means nothing to her. But here's what most people never understand. There are different kinds of silence, and they create completely different outcomes. There's a silence that pushes people away, a silence born from anger, from revenge, from a desire to punish. That kind of silence creates a wall that only grows thicker with time. But there's another kind of silence, a silence that comes from something entirely different, a silence that comes from someone saying, "I value my peace more than I value winning this argument." And that silence, that one does something remarkable. It creates space. Not distance, space. And in that space, something happens that no amount of arguing could ever accomplish. People start noticing what's no longer there. Your constant availability, your desperate energy, your willingness to chase them down with explanations. They notice the absence of those things, and in that absence, they often begin to hear their own thoughts, the ones they've been avoiding, the ones they've been drowning out with emotional noise. But here's where I need to be honest with you, because this is where most people get it completely wrong. Many men interpret this idea as a game. They think silence means ignoring someone, playing hard to get, waiting for the other person to panic, so they come running back. They think it's a strategy, a tactic, a move in an emotional chess match. And that's not what we're talking about here. That's manipulation dressed up in different clothes. That's the opposite of what creates real, lasting change in how people see you. A truly high-value man understands something fundamentally different. He's silent, not because he's playing a game. He's silent because he's made a decision about what he will and won't accept in his life. He's silent because his peace matters more to him than the temporary feeling of being right. And here's the thing that people pick up on, almost instinctively, that difference. They can feel whether your silence comes from strength or whether it comes from hurt, pretending to be strength. Think about what happens when you stop trying to convince someone, when you stop arguing, defending, explaining, pleading. The conversation stops being about who's right and who's wrong. It stops being about winning, and that removes something crucial. It removes the thing that person was reacting to, you, your arguments, your energy, your desperation. When you take that away, people don't immediately feel relieved. Sometimes they feel confused. Sometimes they feel like something is missing, even if they can't quite name it. That's because human beings are pattern-seeking creatures. We notice when patterns change. We notice when someone who always showed up in a certain way suddenly doesn't. And when a familiar pattern disappears, our brain starts asking questions. What happened? Why did they change? Have I been wrong about something? These questions rarely emerge while an argument is happening. They only appear when there's silence enough to hear them. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine she sends you a message designed to pull you into another emotional debate. Maybe it's accusatory. Maybe it's testing you. Maybe it's just pushing buttons she knows will get a reaction. In the past, you've always responded. You've explained yourself. You've defended your position. You've tried to make her see things your way. This time, you do something different. You don't attack back. You don't write paragraphs trying to convince her she's wrong about you. You don't beg for understanding. You simply stay calm. You answer only if there's something genuinely meaningful to say. Otherwise, you go back to your day. And here's what usually happens. Nothing. On the surface, at least. She may not react at all. She may seem completely unaffected. She might even seem like she doesn't care. And that's exactly where most men give up. They think, see? She doesn't miss me. She doesn't care. This isn't working. But they're looking at the wrong thing. They're looking at what's visible on the surface when what matters is what's happening beneath it. When someone who always chased stops chasing, something shifts in their brain. Not immediately, not always visibly, but it shifts. The routine they'd become accustomed to suddenly changes. The certainty that you'd always be there trying to fix everything, trying to convince them, trying to be understood, that certainty disappears. And in its place, there's space, not emptiness, space. And space is where reflection happens. But here's where we need to separate something really important. Reflection doesn't guarantee she'll miss you. It doesn't guarantee she'll come back. What it does do is create the conditions where honesty becomes possible, where people can actually think about situations without the noise of constant conflict, where they can ask themselves real questions instead of just reacting. This is where I need to talk about the mistake that destroys everything. And it's a subtle mistake. It's easy to make because it looks like strength on the surface. Many men use silence as punishment. They disappear completely. They ignore messages that deserve a response. They hope she becomes anxious enough, scared enough, that she'll come running back. They post on social media, hoping she'll see it and realize what she's missing. They make their silence about making someone else feel bad, so they'll come crawling back. That's not strength. That's control, disguised as self-respect. And here's the thing, people feel the difference. They might not be able to articulate it, but they feel it. Silence that comes from emotional maturity feels different than silence that comes from revenge. One feels calm, one feels heavy. One creates space for something real to happen. The other creates distance that only grows. A genuinely high-value man operates differently. If communication is necessary, he communicates honestly. If his partner reaches out needing to talk about something real, he listens and responds with integrity. If there's nothing productive to add to a conversation, he doesn't force words just to ease his own anxiety. He doesn't stay silent to punish. He stays silent because he refuses to sacrifice his own peace for endless emotional circles. And that's something people can sense. It's not about what you say, it's about the energy behind the silence. It's about the fact that you're not falling apart, you're not collapsing, you're not frozen, waiting for them to make the next move. You're actually living. That calm confidence has a presence even when very few words are spoken. But here's what most people miss. Silence alone isn't what actually changes the dynamic. What you do while you're silent changes everything. And this is crucial. This is where most people fail because they think silence means waiting. They think it means sitting at home, checking their phone every 5 minutes, tracking where the other person is, monitoring their social media, hoping for a sign. That's not silence. That's torture. That's waiting. And that's the opposite of what we're talking about here. Real silence only has power if your actual life keeps moving. Let me explain what I mean. Don't wait for her. Don't put your life on pause while you see what happens with the relationship. Don't become a person who's frozen in place, hoping things will change. Instead, keep building your own life. Keep showing up for yourself the way you expect her to show up for you. Focus on your work. Focus on your health. Focus on your purpose. Focus on your friendships. Focus on developing skills and interests that matter to you. Not to prove a point, not to make her jealous or want you back. Do it because that's what grounded, emotionally mature people do. They don't let one uncertain relationship derail their entire life. They understand something fundamental. My happiness doesn't depend on one person's attention. And here's what's actually powerful about that. Confidence isn't saying, I don't need anyone. Confidence is showing, my happiness doesn't depend on one person's attention. There's an enormous difference between those two things. One is arrogant, one is secure. People are naturally drawn to those who have direction. When your days are filled with genuine purpose, something shifts in how you carry yourself. You stop checking your phone every few minutes. You stop measuring your worth by how quickly someone replies. You stop wondering what you did wrong and start wondering what you want to do right. Your energy changes. You become calmer, more patient, more present in your own life. And something unexpected happens. You become more attractive. Not because you're performing attractiveness, but because you're no longer operating from fear. You're operating from a place of self-respect. Imagine two men, both stop texting, both create space in the relationship. But here's where they diverge. The first one spends every night staring at his phone, checking if she's messaged, replaying conversations in his head, wondering what he did wrong, constructing stories about what she might be thinking. His mind is with her constantly, even though they're not communicating. He's frozen in place, waiting for her to validate that he's still worth something to her. The second man goes to the gym. He works on a project he's been putting off. He actually shows up when his friends invite him out instead of canceling to wait for a message. He reads books, he learns new skills, he sleeps peacefully because his mind isn't churning at night. He's genuinely growing. From the outside, both men look like they're being silent, but emotionally, they're living in completely different worlds. One is waiting, one is becoming, and that difference is eventually noticed. Not because you're being intentionally obvious about it, but because people have an instinct for who's together and who's falling apart. When someone realizes you aren't frozen in place, that your world didn't collapse without them, something shifts in how they see you. You become someone with options instead of someone who needs them. You become someone who's building something instead of someone who's just surviving. And that's attractive, not in a manipulative way, but in the real way that makes people respect you, because they see someone choosing their own growth even when things are uncertain. That's what a high-value man protects. His peace, not his pride. Because pride says, I'll make her regret losing me. Peace says, I'll become a better man no matter what happens. And here's the truth. With that mindset, you actually do win. Because whether the relationship continues or it doesn't, you still become someone you respect. You still grow. You still build something meaningful. Your happiness isn't dependent on a specific outcome. But there's one more mistake I need to address, because it's subtle, and it destroys everything we've talked about. And this mistake looks a lot like strength on the surface. So you have to be careful. Don't turn silence into a game. If you truly value your peace, don't use silence as a strategy to control someone. Use it as a boundary that protects your emotional well-being. That's the difference. And this is where a lot of men get confused. They start counting. She took 3 days to reply, so I'll wait 4. She ignored 1 message, so now I'll ignore 2. Suddenly, the relationship stops being about genuine connection and starts being about keeping score. Both people are trying to win. Both people are trying to prove something. And when both people are in that mode, nobody feels understood. Nobody feels safe. Healthy relationships aren't built on emotional chess. They're built on emotional security, on knowing that the other person genuinely cares about your well-being, not just how you make them feel. A truly high-value man doesn't disappear to make someone anxious. He doesn't post things on social media hoping she'll notice. He doesn't pretend to move on just to get a reaction. He simply refuses to chase conversations that have lost their purpose. If she reaches out with honesty, he responds with honesty. If she wants a real conversation, he actually listens instead of planning his response. If nothing changes, he accepts reality instead of forcing a different outcome. That's real strength, because maturity isn't measured by how long you can stay silent. It's measured by how well you can stay true to your values. Your silence is never the message. Your character is. Your integrity is. Silence only gives people the space to notice who you actually are. If you've become bitter during that silence, they'll feel it. If you've become peaceful, genuinely at peace with yourself, they'll feel that too. And that's why self-respect is always more powerful than revenge. Because revenge depends on someone else's reaction. Self-respect doesn't. It's not contingent on whether they come back or care or notice. Here's what most people eventually discover. The greatest power of your silence isn't what it makes her feel. It's what it helps you discover. Because when the constant texting stops, when the endless explaining ends, when you no longer spend every day trying to change someone else's mind or convince them of your worth, You finally hear something, your own voice. You start asking questions that actually matter. Am I respected in this relationship? Am I becoming the man I want to be? Am I holding on because this relationship is healthy or because I'm afraid to let go? These questions change lives. Why? Because a truly high-value man doesn't build his entire identity around another person's approval. He enjoys love, he values connection, but he never makes them the foundation of his self-worth. That's what emotional maturity looks like. And here's something many people eventually realize. Sometimes your calm silence gives a relationship room to heal. Sometimes it reveals that both people are actually willing to communicate with greater honesty and vulnerability. And sometimes it simply reveals that it's time for both people to move forward separately. Not every silence brings people back together, but every healthy silence gives you clarity, and clarity is far more valuable than false hope. So here's what I want you to remember. Never measure your silence by one question. Did she come back? Measure it by a better one. Did I become more peaceful, more confident, and more emotionally grounded? Because that's a victory nobody can ever take from you. That's a win that matters. The strongest person in the room isn't always the loudest. He's often the one who knows exactly when to speak, when to listen, and when to let silence do what arguments never could.